Excellent. So, Lee, thanks for taking the time out of your very, very busy schedule, protecting our community and bringing clarity and accountability to the state. There are not many individuals like you still doing that, so really, really important. And for those who are watching, just to explain a little bit about why we're doing this, we're not recording enough of our cultural history in the UK as African and Caribbean heritage communities. And what I wanted to do is at least chart some of our experiences in relation to black male leadership in the UK. And I felt it made sense to start with you for a lot of reasons that we'll get into in the interview.
But you play a role in that historic leadership yourself, son. Having, I remember when we first met actually, because I was struggling with trying to free Frank Critchlow at the Mangrove from being fitted up by the former Commissioner of Police Paul Condon, who was then an inspector at Notting Hill. And he planted drugs on 11 Mangrove people, including Frank, who didn't drink and smoke. And you were the chair of the Alcohol and Drug and Workers Black Ethnic Minority Drug Workers Forum, I think, and found a member of that. And so when I saw that, and being a member of the National Bloc, of course, I've got to get this guy in, because I wanted to make the association between drugs policy and political oppression of the Black Power movement on All Saints Road.
Wow.
And that's how we came together.
Wow, and I didn't even remember that.
And then subsequently, I remember you because you were then, you took a fairly small drugs and alcohol agency that I remember, because we used to provide crack services for the crack cocaine epidemic that swept through just after '86. So we were looking for services that can provide that. And I remember your organisation, and I remember sitting back and watching that grow from maybe £500,000 up to 15-17 million pounds under your leadership. So you're part of the story you're trying to tell. Well, maybe I should come back and interview you.
Yeah, I was going to. It's well, you caught me a little bit off guard by that. I mean, yes, a bit of a hybrid. I've always liked making money and giving back at the same time, and that's probably one of the most memorable and challenging experiences. We'll talk about another time. But this is about you as the big dog in the room, and not Mr. Ahmun, and maybe we will pick that up another time. So yes, I wanted to start with you because you're still here, actually, whereas a lot of the individuals from your generation have sadly passed or have retired and or been fitted up and not recovered. And maybe we'll get into some of that in this interview. But so let's just start with the part one of your life and your formative years and what formed a man, you know, your early childhood experiences. You were born in the UK or abroad?
Born in Manchester, 1958. So the year when Muhammad Ali was really emerging onto the scene. Great years.
As soon as you said that, I saw the BBC interview with Parkinson. Was
I am the greatest. And my mum was half African, half English. Her father having arrived here from Sierra Leone in the early 1900s. Married my grandmother, who's a white English lady, in 1926 in Manchester. So one can only imagine what that was like, given he was your complexion. Back in 1926. My father's Jamaican, but he's a light-skinned Jamaican, so he's probably lighter than me. He's from Old Harbour, a village that is almost like a hillbilly village, really. It's up in the hills. You don't get there when it rains because the road crumbles and falls. It's called Boyce Content. And mother and father had 3 children, 2 sisters and a brother. They broke up just after I was born, and I ended up living with my mother and my grandparents, my African grandfather and my grandmother, and grew up in Cheetham Mill in Manchester during those early years. So
let me pause you there. I've just got my therapist hat on. I haven't done therapy in over 20 years, but the attitude's still there. There's a couple of bits that I want to pick out of that. I think one, the point you made about colorism, or let's put the ism into it, because I think it's an important one. And many times I know people have referred to your light skin, he's mixed race, he's not fully black, and so on. And it's just interesting how we go out of our way to find reasons to divide each other. And I mean, my grandfather had green eyes, you know, and was very light skinned as well. It's just interesting watching how that jumps generations, and yet, even though we know it's there, we still use it to divide us. So you're saying your family was effectively separated, really?
Yep, absolutely.
How did that affect you, do you think?
Well, it meant I didn't see my father at all in the formative years of my life. I didn't actually meet him till I was 17 years old, so it was a long old haul for me. I grew up with the permanent accusation on the colorism thing that I've seen your mum's, you know, black. She was actually what they used to call back in those days half caste. It's a term I hate.
Yes.
But that's what she used to call it.
Yeah.
And she used to say to me, look, Lee, whatever people say to you, just know your father's Jamaican. He's a proper black man, in all intents and purposes. Light-skinned though he may be from Jamaica. And so I grew up constantly reacting badly to people accusing me that either my mother or my father was white. And it wasn't because of, well, it was because it wasn't true. And I knew it not to be true. So that's how I grew up. I reacted badly to accusations that I was mixed race. I reacted badly to accusations. And it was largely because my mum kept telling me, son, you're not mixed raced.
Do you think you've become, and let me just use my language the way I want to use it and let people qualify it as they see fit, but do you think you've been more black as a consequence of that? Has that been part of the reaction? I mean, and I want to give you a contrast. So my name's Vivian. And I spent the first part of my life defending that name. Oh, it's a girl's name, or whatever it is. And I think for a while I was more male, but hyper male, as a counterbalance to that. It wasn't until I trained as a therapist and stuff and I realised you can smile, laugh and joke and not be weak. I don't know, what do you think?
I think that's definitely part of the story, because I think that, you know, as a young, you know, it's like when you're a young man, you're exerting your identity.
Yes.
And mine was a profound blackness. And I left people in no doubt how black I was. And to a certain extent, given I adopted the sort of hyper black masculinity caricature, that was definitely true. I often remember, you know, seeing people like Ice-T and other people, and even Malcolm himself, who was called Red before. And my father's like that, you know, the Jamaicans with the red hair.
Yes.
The whole psychology about, you know, the light-skinned black guys who are not mixed race, you know, really put the boat out in terms of their blackness. And I think to a certain extent that's true. And it was certainly true for me as a younger man I was growing up.
That early childhood, are there any key things that stick out for you? Really major challenges that you feel that you're still carrying in terms of a scar or a burden, and any experiences that you think really just set out, you know, your trajectory, and has informed the success that you've had since?
Yeah, I think I moved around a lot as a kid. So I never got settled anywhere very quickly. So I became a sort of chameleon. I quickly learned to read people very quickly and could adapt to any particular situation. So that my sort of my adaptability to change and to manage change, you know, was quite sophisticated. And I think that had an effect. I lived with my grandparents. My mum went off and tried to get work and build a place, get a house so that we could eventually move together. That lasted far longer than it was supposed to, so I stayed with my grandparents till I was 8 years old. Then eventually they went to live with my mum. She was used to being a single mum. I was used to being in a very loving household. It was a traumatic transition, and it took a long time for me to get used to that. But I think the overriding thing is, and it's partly why I've lived in the current house I've lived in for 32 years, is that I abhorred the fact that I moved around so much as a child, and I my anchor in moving around was continually going back to my grandparents, to their old home. Now when my grandfather died and my grandmother, the houses were then demolished because it was, you know, coming up to the 1970s and old houses were being demolished. I felt physical loss when we lost that house, when she lost that house. She moved to a, you know, nice new, you know, a council estate thing. It was never the same, and she was never the same as a consequence. And I felt the permanency of that grandparents' house in my life continued to provide me an anchor long after the house had been demolished. And one of the things I decided very early on in my life is that when I settle down, I'm going to make sure that the one house I have is capable of lasting a generation, so that it can provide a degree of permanency in what was for me a very impermanent childhood. And that's what I've managed to do, thank God. I'm blessed in that regard.
And you come out of the bad boy Moss Side thing, and we only know Moss Side in London, so forgive my generalisation there. But no, you went to jail and you qualified as a social worker. They don't seem to match somehow. So
No.
Is that adaptability again?
It was, because I was the face. So yeah, I grew up in, part of my moving around, I grew up in Oldham from about 8, 9, 10 till about 19. And they were all Bajans coming from Barbados, and it's a big Bajan community there, slightly different from Jamaicans. Much more solidarity, much more empathy, much more committed to education. I like them. There were Jamaicans there, of course, and we all got on fantastically well. But I grew up there, and in my teenage years, and so, but we were only 35 minutes away from Moss Side, so as we were younger, we were up and down. I was the face, so the white people used to come and talk to us as a group, and they said, Jasper, go talk to them and tell them what, you know, whatever we wanted to tell them. Or if we was in a blues or a party and the police came to the door, there's a Jasper, go talk to them people then, because you speak that speaky spokey, so talk to them. I'll go around and, you know, talk to them and so on and so forth. And so that's the role that I generally had. It was like an advocate role, even though it was in a sort of petty gang setting. I was the guy that went to mediate between the warring factions. I was the guy that spoke to authorities when they needed speaking to. And I grew up in that role. And then because I grew up in that role, and because of my malleability and adaptability as a young person, when I came out of jail, I went to do a training course, which was only for social care workers, you know, old people, taking them to the shops and shaving them and so on and so forth. But on my first day of this training course, which was only for 3 months, and you spent 4 weeks in different social care establishments, on my first day there, they asked me if I was here for the TOPS course, which I was, or the CQSW. And being from the road, I thought, CQSW, yeah, that sounds nice. So I said, yeah, I'm here for the CQSW. And as soon as I said that, then my friends went off to wipe the bums and shave the old ladies and take old men to shops. And I was dispatched to case conferences because they thought I was there for a certificate in qualified social work.
Right.
And I maintained that fiction throughout that training course. So every time they asked me, which course are you here for, I said CQSW. And so I thought, this is fantastic. They're doing all the work that, you know, frankly, I'm not really that interested in, and I'm getting to sit in these case conferences, deciding why children are in care and not in care, a whole side of formal Britain that I'd never ever been involved in, except to being arrested. I was now being a party to, and they didn't know, and I was playing that role very successfully. And as one of those placements was in a children's home, and I went to the children's home, and on the very first day, when I knocked on the door, all I could hear people say is screaming, "Who is it?" And the door was open. It was a children's home for boys under the age of 17, and there were 11 boys there between 8 and 17, all white boys. And it was in Salford, and I opened the door and walked in to do my placement. And as I got in, there was a door to my left, and there was a birthday cake smashed against the door, literally, like it'd been nailed there, dripping. And I could hear voices from inside saying, "Who is it? Phone the police, we need help." That was my first day. And so
we're not really laughing at the human drama.
And so, you know, I said, I'm Lee Jasper, I'm here for the placement and so on and so forth. And I worked in there. Now, because I'd just come out of jail, I was telling them, but I hadn't told anybody I'd been to jail. They say, have you got a criminal record? I said, no. And when I went in there, because I know those kids, those urban little white boys and girls from Salford, I just got them in a corner and said, listen, let me tell you the way it's going, right? Yeah, nah, I did that in here on my shift. You know something? So I put it on them. They were as good as gold when I was in the house. So my social work skills were seen as absolutely A1, and they funded me to go and do my CQSW.
Revolutionary.
They funded me to do my CQSW. And I stayed there 3.5 years for social services and qualified as a consequence.
A lot of people don't know that about you.
No, they don't.
They don't know anything about that, and it's you play up and project this bad boy, you know, no back end, no preparation delivery, when in fact there has been a hell of a lot of preparation in crafting the Lee Jasper that we see today. And I think that's a really important bit. And we're going to skip over the jail piece, because we're always hearing about black men in jail anyway.
Well, it was routine. It wasn't, you know. It was sus. It was.
Well, we can leave them to speculate.
Okay.
we're going to get into something much more interesting, which is the role of Lee Jasper, the family man. Well, where did that begin?
Well, because
you're big on family.
I am very big on family.
You know, you like to, you know, shame me how big and structured your family is. So, you know, I think it's only right that I reluctantly shine a light on that, because it is inspirational.
Well, I was a father at 15, so I was father while still at school, although I left school without any qualifications. And I had another daughter by the time I was 17, so I'd squatted a house and we'd moved in. We were married at when the mother of my children was 16, and I'd because of the fractured nature of my own childhood, I'd always hankered for that family life. That's what I wanted. I wanted to provide that for the kids. I wanted to break the chain, as it were. So I got married early, which is a real stupid way of trying to break the chain, actually. But in fact, I was extending it. And had 2 girls when I was in Oldham. They eventually came to live with me because their mother had a difficult psychology, and she couldn't cope with the kids. So by the time they were 6 and 8, they'd come to live with me. I'd come home. At that time I was a student, having qualified for the university, because I was part of those first university courses after 81, which says if you didn't have any qualifications and you could pass this foundation course, you could go to university. So I went to the foundation course at Abraham Moss College in Moss Side, and my sisters came with me and a few of my friends. Passed that, got a university place. So I was in university, 2 cars, lovely 3-bedroom flat in Moss Side. I was doing my studying, partying most weekends, come home all week, and 2 little girls are sitting on my doorstep.
Wow.
And changed my life fundamentally for the better, although I didn't
appreciate it at the time.
I didn't appreciate it at the time.
Yeah.
And so I always wanted to try and build that family life, and I'd failed in the first instance. When I got them, you know, I made it a virtue, too much of an earnest virtue, really. I wouldn't even let people help me. I said, no, they're my kids, I'm going to do it. And
pride.
You know what I mean? They'd be screaming because I'm combing their hair and ripping it out from the roots, and not realising you got to oil it and do all this. I said, Daddy, no, please. And I'm saying, no, I'm going to do it, you know. And then I had a neighbour next door, and I used to live on the landing in Moss Side, and she used to gently coax me to say, let me help you, son. And she'd oil their hair for me, and then I let my sisters and my mother help me out. And
gradually.
So in the end, you know, it was a real family effort, and we looked after those girls too. And then I met my second wife, Zena, and we had 2 children. And once I'd qualified at university, my 2 children and her 2 children, she had 2, and then we had 2 together, all moved to London, to this present house.
And London didn't know what you had in store for it.
No, it didn't. And the funny thing is, the very first day I came to London, I still have the footage. The very first day I came to London, they were filming at Euston Station because Norman Tebbit, the then Tory minister, employment minister, had said, you know, the problem, if you're unemployed, then get on your bike and find a job.
Yes.
So they were interviewing people coming off the train from the north saying, have you come to look for work in London? And I'd come for an interview. So they were asking, so my very first time in London was an interview with ITV London asking me, what are you doing in London? I said, I've come here to find a job.
I've seen that. I've seen it.
Unbelievable.
And you've still got that, have you?
I've still got that footage.
And maybe we'll be able to cut a bit of it to this. So we're not going to promise anything. If you're watching this and it's not there, you know we weren't able to. But we'll definitely. It's powerful just watching that. I love time travel anyway. But yes. So yes.
Yeah. So I came to London. I got a job with the Rayner Foundation. In fact, my first interview was Herman Ousley, and he refused me.
Wow.
In a London Education Authority. So thanks for that, Herman.
Yeah.
Mate. And I went for an interview there, and they turned me down. And it was him and Paul Butanga who interviewed me. Yeah. And they weren't famous then. They weren't high up. So they were just ordinary officers. And I eventually got a job with the Rayner Foundation. I used to work above a chicken shop in Rye Lane in the Interval Housing Project.
Let me stop you there. I'm not interested in that.
Oh, okay.
Because you're in London now, so you know, and we're all wanting to know about, you know, some of us, some who don't know and need to know, and some who do know and want to hear it out of your own mouth. This whole riots thing. What was your part in all of this?
Well, in '81 in Manchester, you know, we were down there like a flash for the riots. I mean, you know, when you look at the kind of uprisings that
what riots are we talking about for those young people that
they were all over the northwest, but Moss Side, obviously you had your little rock of mine in Oldham, but that was the kind of minor league compared to the big show which was going on in Moss Side. In Moss Side it was trenchant warfare, and the sights and sounds and activities that we saw on that day that you would only be part of some sort of small skirmish in some sort of, you know, developing world backwater between the armed militias. It was that bad. I always have this vision of a busload of police officers coming into Moss Side, and it was ambushed on both sides. And when I tell you that the missiles that were thrown at that bus made it look like it was being shot by semi-automatic cannon, so much so that the driver got out and run because all the windows were smashed. The police officers got out and run. It was so bad that the police officers ran into the police station, locked themselves in the cells.
Wow.
And the mob dismantled the police station down to its cells, right? And were seeking to get into the cells, and they were only stopped because reinforcements arrived.
Wow.
But they literally stripped that police station bare. And you know, I remember those times, and people got to remember the psychology of those times. You know, when you were stopped by a police officer, right, and he would grip you and then put his, you know, stinking breath to your ear and say, "You fucking little nigger, what do you think you're doing here?" And then you'd see your mate get battered, and you'd get battered. And if you went to the police station, I remember when I first went to the police station, the man said, "Okay, son, I know you've never been to the police station, so in the interview room, my name's Sergeant blah blah blah, and I just wanted to say, you know, introduce myself." So, like an idiot, I held my hand out. Yeah, backhand and knocked me off my tail. Listen, let's get it straight. And that's why I knew which way was up from the jump.
Yes.
They were vicious, they were malicious, they were uber violent, they were sadistic, and anytime you could vent yourself in relation to taking them on, you would, you know. So as a young boy, we'd spend hours practicing the one punch technique, because we knew if a policeman came to you, gave him one punch and you got him right, he'd go out and you could be away on your toes. That's the last time you'd see you. It's not like today where they got CCTV everywhere and all that sort of palaver. So we used to practice on punch bags. One punch, sprint. One punch, sprint. And we used to do it as a set routine. Some people then turn that into mugging. So as you do, it's not my kind of forte. But back in those days, yeah, that's what you did to survive. So my involvement was visceral in those. It was exciting, it was dangerous. People are not going to like it because, you know, people won't like it. But as a young black man, I never felt so empowered as I did on that day. I subsequently learned that that was a temporary power, and it wasn't what I was really looking for. But as a young man, full of energy and vim and vigour, and wanting to make sure we stuck it to them on that day, boy did we stick it to them. It got so we were able to phone Liverpool, because they were sending helicopters from the helipads in Liverpool down the M62 to my side. We was able to send word to Liverpool, and the black community in Toxteth went to the Liverpool police station helipad and burned the helicopters down.
Wow.
That's how.
So coordinated as well.
Coordinated as well. Unbelievable.
So, yeah, on the back of that early training, conditioning, exposure to that kind of conflict, you come to London. How did that inform your politics? Then I suppose the politics was beginning to form.
Well, because I did my foundation course in Manchester that I did before my degree, was all on black history. It was led by a white Marxist guy called George. He was a lecturer, just fundamentally interested in black liberation. Jill John, who's Gus John's wife, they were married as a couple at the time, she was a lecturer there. The politics, the training we got is the politics of the black struggle up until that point, the early 80s in Britain, was my curriculum. When I came to London, I was like, I got to go, you know, I know everything. I know where everything's at. I know that Mangrove is in West London.
It's no wonder they're cutting courses like that if they're producing Lee Jaspers.
Well,
can you blame them?
Yeah, and I wasn't the only one it produced.
Well, this is my point.
Yeah, and so when I got to London, I was like, right, you know, having read Malcolm X, his biography, and having studied black liberation philosophy and politics, I was like, black self-organisation is a thing, and I'm going to come the prince and the doyen of it.
Give me 5 books, just whilst we're in self-learning and personal professional development at the moment. Could you give me 5 books that you think, so you're going to kick yourself afterwards and say, oh, I should have said this one and that one, but off the top of your head?
How Europe in Undeveloped Africa, Walter Rodney. Walter
Rodney, powerful, I can see his face on the cover right now. Good.
Malcolm X, autobiography.
That one switched me on.
Third Wave, Alvin Toffler.
Yes.
Alvin Toffler was a futurologist, and he talked about the impermanency of modern society, and that got me thinking incredibly. He was not a black guy, but he was a powerful thinker. I can't remember the guy because I've dismissed him, but there's a guy who wrote the book about early human civilization being influenced by aliens. I can't remember his bloody name.
Oh, the white guy.
White guy.
Yeah.
Sorry? Huh?
Zachariah Stitchin?
No.
He did something like 4 books, 5 books.
Eric von Daniken.
Yeah.
The Gods.
Everybody was
like
yeah.
My sister gave it to me.
The little ones, like.
Yeah. And I read it and it blew my mind. And
that's 4.
Yeah, the final one would be. You're not going to believe this, but it's a book that I read as a child. Robin Hood. I just love Robin Hood. I like the thing about robbing the rich to feed the poor. This is my kind of guy. And another one was, I have to say another one, I know it's 6, but another one was, what was it? The guy that was stuck on an island with Man Friday.
Robinson Crusoe.
Robinson Crusoe. Yeah, that was
interesting.
So yeah,
interesting.
Those were my political and childhood formative books.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad they asked the question. So,
not a traditional answer, I suspect. In many ways.
Some yes and some no. Absolutely no. So you're in London, and you're being educated and trained. So you're getting the relevant tools. How does that then begin to play out in terms of your politics?
Well, first of all, I joined trade union. and in that trade union, I began to talk about black self-organisation. Where's all the black people at? What, you know, why aren't we self-organising union? That causes a bit of ruckus because they don't want us separating out and organising. But we did that. Became secretary. Became an executive member of my local trade union. So as a consequence of that, I used to get all these things coming through post and material. Then after the 1986 riots, the National Council for Voluntary Organisations had an urban policy conference. And some people, I didn't go, but some people went along to that, and they came back and said they didn't discuss anything about the riots. Race wasn't discussed. And this is September after the riots.
Wow.
That year. And so we went as a caucus and demanded that they provide provision for the black community to meet to assess what happened after the riots. And they provided it for the first 3 years.
Wow.
And we had annual conferences, and those were the formation of the National Black Caucus.
And what was the year?
86.
86.
So it was autumn 86.
And so those riots, what role did you play?
No. By that time, I'd realised the futility of rioting in that sense.
Yeah.
And I saw that even after 81, yeah, we had a good time that night, but when they came for us, boy, it was ruthless. And people spent a lot of time in jail. I was lucky, you know, because I'd managed to duck out, dive out, and not get caught. But for those who got caught up in it, in fact, the 86 riots happened because so many young black people got such disproportionate sentencing after the 81 riots.
Yes.
And when they went in, half of them weren't even guilty.
Yes.
And they got so pissed off that as they all started to come out between 84, 85 and 86, that radical cohort was back on the street again. And we weren't going to have a bar of the kind of racism that was going on. But in terms of my thing is, I was working in London, but my family was in Manchester. And you know, it's like when you've got a family, I've got to feed people, I've got to look after people. And
there's an accountability.
It's a whole different sort of thing. So, yeah.
Let me stop you there, because I think that's first phase or the first movement, and the second movement, because we've already lived it, we know is going to be very explosive. So I'm going to take a pause and deal with that in part two of this very, very in-depth and timely conversation about Lee Jasper, the man, the legend. All right, thank you.
Okay.